PolyTheism is a podcast at the intersection of sexuality, identity, relationships, and spirituality. If you're seeking a deeper spiritual connection in these areas of your life, we're hoping to be companions on your journey.
Whether you've been hurt by religion and are looking for healing, identify with a faith tradition and are looking outside of the box, identify as spiritual but not religious and want more, or are looking for meaning beyond what is in your life, we believe we can do this together.
Through love, curiosity, and wonder.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, Sandra.
What are we talking about today?
Oh, today we are talking about everybody's favorite thing to talk about, which is self-pleasure.
Are we going to talk about masturbation?
We are going to talk about masturbation.
Is that
allowed? Yeah, it is allowed.
Okay.
You know, the spiritual joy of self-pleasure, because, you know, as incarnate, wonderful beings that are capable of experiencing pleasure, why should we not take self-pleasure to the nth degree?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that might argue that the nth degree is pretty extreme, you know, but I don't know. I don't know if masturbation can go to the nth degree.
Well, it really just depends. So as somebody who works in a hospital, of course, once in a while we do run into these cases where, people come in with a wide variety of things put inside of their body in the pursuit of self-pleasure. And sometimes these are not healthy. They need surgical extraction.
The Journal of Emergency Medicine every year does a compilation of things found in people's butts. I used to do transcription at a library to put things into a database before we had scanning technology, and that was always my favorite one, is when I got to the annual, here's what we found in people's butts this year.
and there you go, right? That
Yeah.
is that is the piece. It people's butts. And we find all sorts of different things to put into our orifice, right? Orifices.
Orifices. I don't
Orifices.
know. Yeah.
I apologize, everybody. Sandra and I are a little punchy this morning.
Yeah, we've had a busy couple of weeks. What have you been doing? Nothing, just moving house and
continuing to move house.
Yeah, you had to replace a furnace and get rid of some asbestos.
Yeah.
And
thankfully, you know, it seems to me that everything is in order, which I'm very, very grateful. We have heat, we have water, we have security. I mean, as far as my Maslow hierarchy of needs, I'm doing okay.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good time to talk about self-pleasure.
Ooh, and I could certainly use some self-pleasure.
Yeah, I bet.
How about you, Sandra? How are you doing over on your end?
I'm doing all right. You know, the time that we are living in is really scary, and I think that our listeners probably feel very much the same. Even the fact that we are talking about polyamory and sexuality in a podcast is something that we have to think about. Is it putting a target on us? And, I mean, we've had a conversation about that, and that's something that we're going to continue to do, even if it does put a mark upon us, because, I mean, if you look at our Facebook presence, or if you look at I won't speak to you, but if you look at my Facebook presence and my online presence, I've never shied away from stating that I am poly, and that I am kinky, and that I am queer, and that I am a loud woman who doesn't play normal gender roles. And, you know, that does put a potential mark on my forehead, but I don't particularly care. I'm going to keep doing it. I think it's really important. And as we dive into talking about masturbation and just self-pleasure in general of any type, I really want to keep in mind that for a lot of us, this is a radical notion. As we're talking about pleasure with other people, right now, I think it is a radical notion that we can pause and find pleasure in the chaos and in the damage that is being done by our current administration. So, as we talk today, I just want you to keep in mind um, sex, whether it's with yourself or whether it's with someone else, or whether it is planning for it or whether it is cleaning up after it, all of that is an act of protest.
Yeah, no, and that's very true. I feel what we have learned through generations of protest is that the systems of oppression want us burned out.
Yeah.
They want us unable to access rejuvenation, restoration. I mean, of course, the core of that being rest, because that is what gives us capacity as human beings to show up and do the work of liberation and the work of justice. And so pleasure, even amid times of chaos, is intensely important in terms of allowing at least myself to feel like I'm fighting for something.
Yeah, to feel a respite, and to feel like there is a reason to fight for humanity, to find that joy and that pleasure with other people or by yourself is finding, I don't know, just sometimes it's just the thing that keeps you moving towards the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think before we go into full bore into masturbation, let's talk a little bit just about pleasure. And Sandra, what gives you pleasure in the world?
Oh my goodness, there are so many things that give me pleasure in the world. You know that I love horror movies, so finding a new horror movie that just really delights me is great. Or even going back to an old favorite, that is something that gives me pleasure. I wouldn't say that I'm a foodie, but I really do like food, and good food is something that I really enjoy. When you come down and we get the opportunity to cook together, that's really joyful for me. And touching somebody else when I want to be touched, is incredibly pleasurable. And weirdly enough, sometimes exercise is pleasurable. The actual act of it is sometimes not so pleasurable, but the way I feel afterwards is really, really pleasurable. And of course, when I am feeling stimulated, I can also really take some joy in just self pleasure in touching myself, and not necessarily masturbating to orgasm, but like, just touching parts, like, touching my nipples, or, just rubbing the inside of my thigh. All of that can feel just good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the act of holding somebody's hand, right? Feeling the caress of a lover, even if it's completely non-sexual, can activate those parts of our brain that tell us that, oh, this is good. This is bringing security. This is bringing connection. We have all these neurochemicals, serotonin, endorphins, dopamine, and they all kind of activate for different reasons with the purpose of letting our bodies know that, oh, this is good.
Yes. Yeah. Connection is good. Connection and vulnerability. I think those are the two things that are really part of this, is that ability to let down enough guard to make not just a physical, but also an emotional and even a spiritual connection with someone else. And I think I don't know exactly how to get into this, so I'm just going to jump right on into it. I think one of the big things that has happened in our society is that we have very much disconnected from ourselves, right? We are taught to look outward for what it is that gives us purpose, for what it is that gives us meaning, for what it is that we do for the world. We talk about our jobs and our side hustles and our hobbies and all of this other kind of stuff, and we don't, especially in American culture, really think about, reconnecting with ourselves and finding that intimacy with ourselves that is so important to development and growth.
Yeah, very much so. Constantly I experience colleagues and patients and people in the world. We're so much up in our heads, right? For intellectual pursuits, for thinking, that, in many ways, we have forgotten as a culture what it means to truly live in our bodies. Right. And I have personally experienced that, where I have ignored how my body feels, whether it is pleasure or pain or both, because I have a sense of, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is the intellectual pursuit, the doing the things, even at the detriment of my physical body. And as much as we have talked about kink and how pleasurable that is and how pain can be part of pleasure, but when it comes to those things that activate that sense of our bodies breaking down, right, we have this stress hormone that is kind of big right now, where we call cortisol, which really help. And cortisol and what's that other neurochemical that floods into our system when we go into fight or flight?
I have
Adrenaline.
Adrenaline.
Okay. Right? So we have cortisol and we have adrenaline, and these two things activate when our brains feel like we are in the shit. Right? It speeds up our hearts. It dilates our blood vessels. It gets things going, and these are really good in short amounts of bursts, right? In the old days of saber-toothed tigers, it probably kept people alive.
Yes.
I don't believe that our brains understand the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a work deadline.
No, we haven't had enough time to evolve into that.
Yeah.
Like the physicality of us has not had the time to evolve. That happens in a much slower pace than the evolution of our technology, than the evolution of our civilization, than the evolution of our job structures and everything else. So yeah, like we do this often together. When we're stressed, one of us will say to the other, "There is no tiger."
There is no tiger.
And you have to just pause and breathe and try to get out of that fight or flight. And that is just, it's such an important part of understanding ourselves today, is that we have been brought up in a civilization that values doing over being. And I mean, everybody's heard this saying, I'm not a human doing, I am a human being. It's a lovely thing to say, but a lot of people still are out there working 40 hours a week, plus trying to be a full-time this, plus trying to be a full-time that, plus having a side hustle, plus trying to have friends, plus everything else. And one of the things that really falls by the wayside is self-care. And masturbation is a part of self-care. And
wow.
Yeah, I think that is something that we need to bring up. I mean, now I am on the asexual spectrum because I consider myself demisexual. But I am also somebody who really appreciates a good orgasm, and very often would prefer to just help myself to it than to have to go and find somebody to help me to it. Maybe that is something that other asexuals experience. I don't want to speak for them, but that is definitely something that can help me relax. It can help me get back into the present. That is so important. I can get stuck in the future or in the past very easily. This moves me right back into the present. It releases chemicals that help me just untense muscles. It's good for the heart. There's a lot of different reasons that I can go into that, but one of the biggest ones I think is literally just showing our bodies some love and attention. There's just way too little of that in our culture. Way too little of that.
Yeah, and so moving from pleasure into like spirituality, right? I feel that, especially with, I'll speak for Christianity because that's what I was raised in.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that pleasure is evil.
Yeah, talk about that some more.
Yeah, so we talk about, at least in Catholicism, the idea of like 7 deadly sins, right? And one of these sins, of course, is sloth. You have rage. You have, these 7 characteristics that
Mm-hmm.
lead, or at least that the church believes, lead people away from God. And somewhere along the lines, self-pleasure and embracing the pleasures of the self became anathema to spiritual pursuits that allowed people to access a spiritual life and access God. I feel that historically speaking, some of that came from the idea of sexual ritual within pagan and polytheistic
Mm-hmm.
religions when Christianity was emerging in the world, like a couple thousand years ago, and how sometimes, you would have orgies, you would have bacchanalia, vomitoriums where people would just, engage themselves so much that it became sick.
Yeah,
Right. And I
overwhelming to their
feel,
bodies. Yeah.
yeah, and I believe that at that extreme of pleasure, if we think about like hedonism to the nth degree, that at least Christianity saw that and was like, no, that is not how we want to be connected to our God. And then over time, then it became all pleasure was sinful.
Right, and we go into asceticism and
Yeah.
yeah, people who only eat porridge.
Trying to remove, and this idea that pleasure distracted one's connection to the divine or one's connection to spirituality, and that by removing the distractions of the flesh, that one could access the fruits of the Spirit.
That's
now,
an interesting.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy. And what it does is it creates a false dichotomy between body and spirit, I think. It's like somehow they are separate things. And I mean, this happened in, the academic world for me too, is that mind and body are separate.
Mm-hmm.
And, that if you are pursuing developing your intellect and building your knowledge and creating new knowledge, that sort of thing, that you can't pay too much attention to your body and you can't pay too much attention to your spirit because it will distract from what you are doing. And I actually even remember, this was really stunning to me, the first time that I met somebody who was in academics and also happened to be not a bodybuilder, but there are similar things to bodybuilding where they're just very, very focused on bodily development and not necessarily muscle development, but body development and how it looks and all of this other kind of stuff. And this person was deeply into that and also a physics PhD student. And I was just like, wait, you can do both? Like it really, and see, this is interesting because it comes into that concept of scarcity again that polyamory really tries to go against, is this concept that somehow there are finite resources available to us for pleasure, for joy, for life. And polyamory suggests that we can look at love as abundance, that there is always more. Always more to be found. And okay, I just
and
blew my
that
own
pleasure
brain.
is a part of that abundance.
Yeah.
Right. And not to say that relationships always have to be pleasurable 100% of the time, but when I think of spiritual care and spiritual resilience, and trying to push away some of these cultural and Christocentric notions of pleasure and the body being evil, to re-embrace this idea that to be in my body and to love on it and to give it what feels good is actually not only just an act of resistance, but it is an act of survival.
Yes. I mean, it is really about and in a lot of ways, it's about reclaiming your body, so that it is no longer a commodity in a capitalist system that has to be shaped and formed so that it is appropriate to be consumed, and can simply be something that you love and appreciate and give pleasure to. Right? Oof.
Yeah. And there are a lot of other spiritual traditions that do embrace pleasures of the body. Like, I think of a lot of pagan systems, some aspects of Hinduism. Buddhism is kind of tricky. I would love to talk to a Buddhist sometime about the idea of pleasure, because I believe that in a lot of Buddhism, there's this idea of, like, finding kind of the mean. Like, a little bit is good, a lot isn't good. Don't go to excess in any of these ways. And yet Buddhism also teaches that that attachments to anything, including pleasure of the body, can lead to suffering.
Yeah.
Right. But that would be a curious conversation for another time. I think going back to kind of what you and I were taught as children when it comes to self-pleasure, Sandra, what were you taught growing up about your body and using your body for pleasure?
Nothing. I grew up in a very small town, and I grew up in the Methodist Church, which is, I've said this often, it's kind of the hippy-dippy version of Christianity, in which kind of like, if you believe this, that's great, but if you believe something a little different, that's cool too. We can all vibe. That it was that kind of situation growing up. But I also grew up in the Bible Belt, which was a place where you didn't talk about these things. You didn't talk about sex. You certainly didn't talk about masturbation. If you touched yourself as a child, you definitely got chastised. And you get your hand slapped, or you get put in a corner or something along those lines, just for putting your hand in a place where your genitals happen to be. And then when I got into junior high and high school, this was before the internet, so I had no information on any of this. And my poor mom, I mean, my dad had 3 daughters, and the concept of talking about anything sexually related was just, he couldn't do it. He couldn't. It was just too awkward. And for my mom grew up in a place where there was no sex education. She got she got a degree in math, and she taught math, but her first couple of years was at a junior college where they literally took a razor blade and cut out the sections in the biology textbooks about human sexuality. So my mom knew nothing except what she learned in her marriage. So I didn't learn anything from that. I don't think I started learning about that until I started actually exploring myself somewhere around 14 or 15. And even then, I didn't have words for it. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that something felt good, and it was likely sexual.
Right. Yeah, and that the likely sexual pieces were not allowed. Or by not allowed meaning not talked about, and by not talked about has like a taboo. Yeah,
it's like there was a sense of guilt associated with that pleasure, for sure. In where I grew up. How about you? I mean, I grew up as a girl, and women don't talk often. Girls don't talk a lot, or at least when I was a girl, didn't talk a lot about sex and about, like, the parts of their body. You don't see them the way you do with men, right? Boys can see their bits. Women can't see their bits. So it's just like, since they're hidden, we just don't talk about them, right?
Yeah.
And, we don't have that locker room talk or anything along those lines that might actually, I don't know, at least have us having a concept of our genitalia,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it different for boys? Was it different when you were growing up?
Well, I know for myself, being raised kind of in a hippie and yet Catholic family, it was always this weird dichotomy where my parents would defer to church teaching when it came to talking about sex. And yet, when it came to masturbation, I remember my parents giving me a copy of like Our Bodies Ourselves kind of
Oh,
thing,
yeah, yeah.
right? And there were some of these sex education videos that my parents would bring home and like have that awkward thing where you're like sitting with your parents watching a video about sex and sexuality.
Oh,
And, of course, back in the 80s, late 80s, and even into the 90s, that was just, that was super awkward and uncomfortable because I think for my parents, part of them really, really wanted to make sure that I was sexually healthy and also didn't know how to do that because their religiosity was telling them another story.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And so for masturbation, for me, or at least self-pleasure, it was one of those things of like, you don't talk about it. Here's some education about it. Do it on your own time.
Yeah.
And
Don't ask me any questions.
And
Yeah.
just like, you have the material in a book, read about it.
Yeah. You just unlocked a core memory for me. We had a 5th grade sex ed, I don't know, 45 minutes, something along those lines, in which they showed us a video. And the things that I remember from the video is, one, watching a child's head emerge from a vagina, which was horrifying when you're a 5th grader, right? And you're just thinking about that part of your body and what might happen to that part of your body, and at that point. And then there were pictures of genitalia with various diseases. And we were told, basically, don't have sex and don't masturbate because these things can happen.
Yeah.
Right? You can pick up a disease just by touching yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I had completely forgotten about that. So, thanks, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Right.
I hope it's different now, but I'm not sure it is.
I think in some places it is. Within the Unitarian Universalist tradition, of which I am a part, we have a program that expands the lifespan. So it's from, for 1-year-olds all the way up to 99-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a human sexuality program focused on consent and respect for oneself and for others. And it really doesn't hold back, and it treats the body and the experience of pleasure as something that is good, something that is necessary for one's health, and something that is a responsibility for oneself and one's partners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I found that to be completely game-changing for me because I had never been introduced to a system like that. The system is called Our Whole Lives, and it was developed in conjunction with the United Church of Christ to offer an alternative of sexuality education that wasn't being given anywhere else.
Is that, I mean, you probably had a little bit before this, but certainly when you got into UU, I'm sure that changed your concept of sex and about masturbation. But you were taught masturbation is bad. You were taught masturbation is not something that you do, or you do in private and don't talk to anybody about. How did that shift? How did that change for you?
Yeah, I feel that it really changed as I began deconstructing my spirituality in my 20s. Because more and more I was encountering my body and the world in ways that encouraged pleasure, but didn't feel sinful, right? And I got to this point where it's like, I don't want to feel guilty anymore for something that I believe is a natural part of being human. Right. And so I began making these conscious decisions of, you know what? It is okay to masturbate. It is okay to have fun with my body. It is okay to participate with others consensually in the fun in their bodies. And it was a process of kind of unraveling my spiritual and emotional connections to sex that were telling me that all of these things were sinful and wrong, and therefore I should feel guilt and shame. And that's a long process, and I feel a process a lot of people go through.
And that is a very deliberate process too. You know, you took on what the culture was telling you about what was okay and what wasn't okay, what was acceptable and not acceptable, what you should feel guilty about, that sort of thing, and chose to actively subvert.
Yeah.
Right? And my own experience was very much the same. You know, as a woman in this culture, I have found many a time that my body predominantly is treated as if it is for consumption, right? The way I look, the way I hold myself, the way I present myself in this world, and what people do with me. And I think that's a very important thing. It's not what I do with myself, it's what people do with me, right? Is designed around what is acceptable for consumption and what is not acceptable for consumption. And I very much actively chose to go against that in my 20s as well. But it was not so much an act of reclaiming my spirituality as it was reclaiming myself for my own pleasure and not for the consumption of others.
Yeah.
And that's and I, you know, in a lot of ways that too is a spiritual act. It is coming to an understanding of myself as a complete autonomous whole who is here for me.
Yeah.
Not just for other people. And that's a radical thing.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you talk about is that this encouragement of self-autonomy and liberation from being an object. Like you are refusing to be an object and are demanding to be a subject, right? For yourself and for others.
Yeah. And so in masturbation, you are the subject of your sexuality at that point, and it gives you an opportunity to reconnect with yourself, to find the things that you need, to be aware of your body and its needs and its desires in a way that our culture really doesn't teach us to do. In fact, our culture kind of reveres the opposite. People are like, yeah, I work 3 jobs, or, you know, I put in 75 hours at work last week, or, you know, that kind of thing. It's changing, it's shifting, but it's a slow shift.
Yeah. In many ways in our culture, human beings are objects. We're commodities. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have human resources departments, and I don't care if you start calling it the people department, you're still acting like human resources.
Yeah.
You know,
and resources are not subjects, right? Resources are objects. They're numbers, they're commodities. When I think about masturbation and pleasure as being spiritual, you know, going back to this idea of making existential and ontological meaning, it's this idea that through pleasure, and, you know, for myself, through masturbation, not only am I connecting with deep self-knowledge, right? Exploring, what do I like? What don't I like? What turns me on? What doesn't turn me on? Surprise, wow, I didn't know that was going to do it. You know, that is an existential pursuit. Or at least I believe that is an existential pursuit, and accessing ideas that are more than just kind of my physical, like serotonin, dopamine, and all these things. Like, I'm putting meaning behind this And the ontological piece is, like I mentioned before, this deconstruction of what does it mean to be a pleasurable sexual being in the world, and choosing to tell myself that my sexuality and my pleasure is good, not only for myself, but for others.
I think that's a really, comprehensive way of looking at this, that understanding that giving yourself pleasure, like giving yourself rest, like giving yourself sustenance, like giving yourself, time, is very much that act of being, well, I mean, my husband says it best, I think. He says self-care is sexy.
Yeah.
Self-care is sexy. And when you are taking care of yourself and your needs and all of that, it is far easier for you to interact in the world. You are not looking to others to fulfill you. You are taking care of your own fulfillment, and then you can show up authentically with other people rather than needily or hungrily, and looking to other people for consumption. Yeah.
And so moving, from masturbation and pleasure, as far as like an experience, what would it mean then, if we think about our own inherent spiritualities, right? Seeking those subjects and objects of meaning, those transcendental pieces of which pleasure is a part. I wonder, how do we then make masturbation into a sacred practice?
Yeah, what a good question. So I am not a part of any of these particular spiritual practices, but I have several friends who are in spiritual practices of various names, in which masturbation is a sacred act. It's a ritual that you go through, and that ritual is about self-connection. Just like, connecting with other people in, say, like in my 12-step program, at the end of a meeting, we get up, we hold hands, and we say something together, right? And we encourage each other, and that is connection. This act is also about sacred connection, right? And so when they go into that act specifically for a spiritual purpose, they have specific things they say, they have specific things they do, they have specific ways of allowing the release of that orgasmic energy that connects them with themselves, and in that internal connection, they believe connects them to the universe as a whole.
Yeah. And, each of us, I know that many people, aside from just, the going to bed or waking up in the morning and, having just a need to just rub one out, before sleep or just waking up, that in many ways I and others will kind of take time romancing oneself, getting into the mood for masturbation, taking a bath, lighting candles, putting on music, creating a space for masturbation for the sheer point of taking time with self-pleasure.
And what is that? What is that if it's not defining a sacred space and building a ritual?
Yeah, well, and I would say in many ways that is creating a sacred space. And when I say sacred, not necessarily magical. So the difference between sacred and mundane is that those things that are mundane are the casual, everyday pieces of the world that we all walk through. That which is sacred are those spaces, places, opportunities, and experiences that are set apart and that are different from the norm.
Yeah.
And so masturbation, if I were to create a sacred ritual for masturbation, it would include all of these elements that evokes the senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. and creating a space in which all of these enliven my body and allow me to explore pleasure in a way that is very different than just kind of waking up with an erection and being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take care of this before I take a shower.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like, quickly shoving a piece of toast in your mouth rather
Right.
than like sitting down and putting some butter and jelly on it and like, savoring it and taking a sip of coffee while you're doing it. That's,
Yeah.
that those pauses, those moments
Mhm.
of intentionality is what make those moments sacred. That what we
Mhm.
can, where and when we squander those opportunities, I mean, we can't do it all the time, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to rub one out, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. Or sometimes you're just horny. That's okay. But finding a way that you can use this to create meaning for yourself is very valuable. Like, I have done sex magic that is involved around masturbation, and the big thing that any one of those has in common is that at release, when I am coming to orgasm, I work towards that and I hold myself at that place so that energy can gather. So
Mhm.
that when I release that energy, I release it to a purpose. It
Yeah.
is, in essence, a prayer
Oh,
offered
very
to the
much so.
world. And there's something incredibly powerful about using that, using your own orgasm, using your own sexual energy to put out into the world the idea of transforming things that don't feel good to us. Like,
Mhm.
one of the ones that I really did very, often when I was younger is around gender roles. I
Mhm.
really, like, I took a gender studies class and was just so shaken by the idea that so many of my traits, were I born with a penis, would have been treated as laudable, but
Mhm.
because I was not, were treated as problematic. I used sex magic to pray to the universe to change that,
Yeah.
to give women more autonomy, to
Mhm.
and more equality, and to be treated as a human being rather than as this, possession.
Yeah. Very much
And
so.
there is a delicious irony in that, as well as just, something sacred.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and for a long time, and either in some parts of the world and in some parts of culture, women's pleasure specifically is seen not only as evil but as dangerous,
mhm,
right? And what does
mhm,
it mean to reclaim pleasure as an act of defiance against oppression,
mhm,
right? And, I would say that creating a sacred ritual of self-pleasure is literally savoring the act of being alive, which then gives a big middle finger to a
mhm.
culture that doesn't want that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So all of us queer folk out here right now, one way that you can really start trying to take back your own energy from all of these places out there, all of the government stuff that is happening and all of the horrific stuff that we're seeing happening within our societies and within the laws that dictate what happens to us. It's awful. And I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself, I'm not necessarily going to say masturbation is the way to go, but certainly carving out time for yourself to find pleasure
Yeah.
and to find joy and to put that middle finger up to people who tell you that you are not valid and authentic
Hmm.
is incredibly valuable. And honestly, doing so through orgasm, I think, is wonderful. Yeah.
And doing so through just even self-knowledge,
Yeah.
right, is
Yes.
is telling the rest of life, I know
Mhm.
myself. I have explored myself. I continue to grow as a sacred sexual being. And who's going to stop me?
Mhm.
Right? Especially if
Mhm.
it's something that, masturbation is usually done solo, not always, but
Mhm.
often. I mean, nobody's there policing it unless maybe people are incarcerated. And even then, people find a way.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, it's so wrong to think that we punish people by taking away pleasure.
I know.
Because
I know.
pleasure can heal, can allow people to be better human beings in the world rather than being starved for touch, being starved for affection, being starved for being a sexual person in the world. Now, I know that we've covered, we talked about sacred space, we've talked about masturbation and how self-pleasure can be put together as part of a sacred ritual. What happens when we bring other people into our sacred spaces? Whether it's mutual masturbation or masturbation parties, or even with a partner, choosing to explore one's body and another's body at the same time.
I don't know.
Well,
lots of things. But how about you start? Because you clearly have a direction that you're going.
Well, I believe it starts with the idea of intentionality. Right? I believe that any time we human beings put intentionality behind an act, it elevates that act out and moves it from the mundane to the sacred. And so the engagement of bringing other people into my own sacred space, and so let's say into my own space of sacred self-pleasure, is an act of very intimate trust. It's an act of bringing another person's energy into the fold, of which then I can learn more not only about myself, but about another, and can help even elevate the experience because another person brings a whole different experience of which I can learn, do I like this? Do I not like this? Help me explore this in a way that I am unable to at this time because it's hard to see outside of my own experience.
That's right. That's super important. That's really, I was sitting here thinking about how, in some ways during masturbation, even when we're doing it alone, we are preparing ourselves to be in connection with others, in that we will understand what gives us pleasure, what doesn't give us pleasure, and we'll be able to speak to others about that, which makes for better connections. But it also helps prepare us for times when things are not pleasurable and when our bodies are saying they don't like that, and we can avoid situations that might become traumatic, in that way, before they get to that point. So we are, like inoculating ourselves as well, from potential damage in exploring ourselves and being aware of what we know and being able to speak to what we know. When we are inviting other people into that space, we are then basically allowing vulnerability between the two people and saying, I'm going to trust you far enough that I'm going to let you know what pleases me and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And that is that, telling people that is a trust level that is incredibly intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it fosters human connection. And human connection is something we desperately need right now.
Yeah.
Because one thing that we have found out of COVID is that there is an epidemic of loneliness, of isolation, and that human beings, or at least in our culture and society, are touch-starved. And not just touch-starved from the touch of another person. We don't even know how to touch ourselves.
Yeah, because again, let's go back to this. We were all trained that it was not okay.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable. It's somehow bad in some way or another. Remember, like you'd be told if you do that enough, you'll go blind.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Like,
Yeah.
It's all these stupid ways that help control. We don't want human beings to go out of control. And there is a responsibility for responsible sexuality. At the same time, messaging like that only damages people.
Mhm.
It confuses people. It's not right. It's not accurate. It's not, I mean,
Mhm.
it's horrible the way in our culture that we raise children, or that many children are raised to hate their bodies and
Yeah.
and to fear their sexuality.
Mhm. So much
Yeah.
so. And it's, and right now it's very much under attack. This concept
Mhm.
of being aware of who you are and how you present yourself in the world, unless you happen to be a cis het white man, is
Yeah.
somehow wrong. And, considering the fact that that is just authenticity, it's really, really troubling.
Yeah. Very
Another
much so.
way in which I think bringing people into that sacred space, into, a ritual of masturbation, can be very valuable between people, is that it decommodifies
Mm.
sexuality. It takes and it makes sex not a transactional
Mm.
experience. We are
Mhm.
not working towards orgasm, right? I stick something in you, we move it, and you're going to have an orgasm and then we're done. That's how
Yeah.
it's done, right? Whereas masturbation is something that can be about the pleasure or prolonging the pleasure. Or even, I'm going to do this and you are not allowed to touch me while I do it. You just get
Mhm.
to experience the pleasure vicariously.
Yeah.
Or any of those things. It takes that out of the traditional transactional activity that our
Mhm.
culture has made sex into.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any problems with Tinder and Grinder existing. I think it's great, and other tools that are out there, but it really is about, like, I want sex. And the whole purpose of this is sex.
Mhm.
And that can be, that can give people the wrong idea that sex is a transaction, it's not an
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah. And, going back, that it's all about intentionality, right?
Mhm.
If two people are consensual in the way of, like, hey, I just want to have sex with somebody, you want to have sex, I want to have sex, let's have
Let's
sex
do it.
together just for doing it. That's awesome,
Yeah.
right? I feel that for relationships, right, for whether it's friendships, for partnerships, for all the different ways that we are connected, and for those of us who are polyamorous, masturbation and sexuality can be elevated from that space of you and I just want to have sex and get off,
Mhm.
to how do we allow our sexualities to bring us closer,
Mhm.
to affirm and promote and enhance our relationships, to bring different partners into the mix.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, what would it mean for a polycule to host a mutual masturbation session with each other, with the whole point of, like, setting up a space, creating a moment that is nothing but let us pleasure ourselves together?
Mhm.
Can I imagine could be incredibly powerful and
Mhm.
connecting.
As long as it's all consensual and
Yeah.
everybody is happy with it. And I think it's really important to note that, like, not every sexual act you do needs to be the sacred,
Yeah.
ritualistic, deep kind of thing. Just like, sometimes you want to create a 7-course meal, and sometimes you just want a hot pocket, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's okay to have the hot pocket of sex, and just enjoy it, and just have a
And sometimes
treat.
a hot pocket is pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, but to treat it as if it is something that
Hmm.
cannot be part of the sacred and cannot be part of the intimate and the vulnerable, I really do think diminishes its impact on us as, the creatures that we are. I think it's
Yeah.
really important to note that, like, we, unlike almost any other animal on the planet, are use sex just for
Hmm.
pleasure and connection. And that is something that there, in most mammals, there is a short period of time in which sex is sought after. Sex is desirable. Sex is like something that the men will fight over, and the women will, solicit. Basically, the
Mm-hmm.
females will solicit. You know, it's and it's not like that with us.
Yeah.
Our sexual structure is such that, once we are adults, we can appreciate it
Mm-hmm.
pretty much almost any time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that self pleasure is a lifespan event. Children masturbate, and not necessarily for the same reasons or with the same intentionalities as an adult does.
Yeah, and without the
But
same
what they
knowledge.
know, yeah, exactly. It's knowledge of the body, and it feels good,
Yeah.
right? And to slap a child's hand just because they happen to touch themselves and be like, oh, hey, this feels good, it's damaging a child. What we
Mhm.
have done, what my nesting partner and I have done with our own son, is just let him know it's like, hey, that's awesome. We encourage him to,
Mhm.
be in his body and feel his body, and that if he wants to do these things, just, go into his room and don't do it on the couch when we're watching a movie together.
That's right. Yeah. The exactly. I am lucky enough to get to work with a sex educator who educates parents and caregivers of young children about how to talk about these somewhat uncomfortable subjects for so many of us who were raised without any context for that. And I love one of the things that is in one of the classes that we are building that is about, like, if a kid puts their hand down their pants, you don't then go, hey, stop that. You say, hey, take your, remember that genitals are private, and that if you want to touch them, you should be touching them in private, and then wash your hands after. And that
Yeah.
just makes it a part of normal existence, is
Mm-hmm.
instead of a, oh my God, this is suddenly a big deal.
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so.
And making it something that is natural, something that is like, just like if I picked my nose, or if I like stuck my hand in my mouth, or,
Mm-hmm.
or if I dug in the dirt, whatever. This is just
Yeah.
a.
These are mucous membranes. We got to keep our bodies healthy. And I believe that when we teach children that self pleasure is done solo or alone, is I think what that reinforces, and what my nesting partner, and I try to do with our own son, is reinforce this idea of, like, if you're touching yourself in public, you're not giving other people consent,
Mhm.
whether or not, to witness.
Mhm.
And so if we really want to give people consent, then, just do this in private. And when
Mhm.
you're older and you have a connection with somebody and you want to do this together, then do it together in private, right?
Mhm.
Or as we get older and we find ourselves immersed within sexual and kinky communities, finding consensual spaces in which
Mhm.
everybody in that space has bought in,
Mhm.
right, to that experience, right? And it
Mhm.
really is rooted in consent and respect of one's sexuality.
Yeah, and then just taking that one more step and talking to like people that you are raising,
Mm-hmm.
from child to adult. I think if we, from what I have understood from you, um, like at least a part of making something sacred is about giving it meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And when we teach children that their bodies are natural, and that touching their bodies is natural, and that these experiences are part of who they are, we are making meaning around their bodies being theirs,
Yeah.
and theirs to choose with, what to do with, and
Mm-hmm.
how to do it. And in doing so, we give them permission to own their bodies.
Yeah.
And that is not something that came out of previous generations. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about that in a lot of other ways these days. Like, people don't, like, I always had to hug the uncle that I did not want to hug, because he
Oh,
would hug
right.
me too
Yeah.
tight, and then he'd pinch my cheeks, and then he'd tickle me, and I hated being tickled. And, I never had a chance to say no on
Mm-hmm.
that. And so
Yeah.
growing up, I didn't feel like my body was my own, because, it really was the purview of adults. And it took a long time for me to get out of that and to make the meaning that my body does belong to me and I can do with it as I please. So, yeah, I think that in itself is a sacred act, is just teaching people as they are growing up about the fact that, masturbation, whether it is to orgasm or not, or just, the touching, is something that is okay. And it is something that you have a right to do with your body.
Yeah. Because we are autonomous beings and we have inherent worth and dignity. And our sexuality is an intricate part of that worth and dignity.
Yeah, and to take it one more step further, that gives us an opportunity to teach people that nobody can take that away from you.
Yeah.
I think one of the really, we see, with incel culture and with some of the things that get taught online these days, and the horrible information out there from men like Andrew Tate that suggests somehow that women are, withholding something that you deserve, that you own, or something along those lines. When we teach people your body is yours and yours only, their body is theirs and theirs only, you can find pleasure without seeking them out.
Yeah.
It might make a tremendous difference.
Yeah. Well, it starts with one person at a time.
Yeah, it does.
Right. And that's kind of what we're doing within our communities, and especially, I believe, within, the polyamorous community. And so, yeah, for all those, listening to this podcast and wondering, how do I make masturbation and self-pleasure into a spiritual practice? Well, begin with intentionality, like Sandra and I have spoken about. It can be a Hot Pocket or a 7-course meal. You get to decide, what that is. And make meaning of it, explore with it, be creative with it. And by doing so, and especially like I've mentioned before, through intentionality, transform the masturbatory and self-pleasure experience and elevate it into kind of a transcendental experience.
Yeah, use it for anything that you think might be valuable, for reclaiming your own body and spirit, for offering peace and healing to the world, for just normalizing the fact that bodies are fun. Any of those things, it can be used, whatever you need, for healing for yourself or for the world.
Yeah.
And when you do, you make it sacred.
Yeah, very much so.
Even if it's a sacred Hot Pocket.
Yep. Sacred Hot Pockets all around.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sandra, for joining me for just this really amazing conversation.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure where it was going to go, and I'm very pleased with the direction it's gone.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.